Hello, I'm Jim Cornell, and this is Base to Base, the weekly biotech podcast from Air Coastal Media. Yes, welcome again to the Base to Base Biotech podcast, and this is number 17, going out on July the 11th, or the 11th of July, depending on your preferred date format. Either way, it is French Friday, among plenty of others. Another busy week of news that we will get to in a moment, and if you do have news or suggestions for who should be on the podcast, or indeed any other suggestions or comments, please do get in touch at jim@deeptechdigest.com, which is also the address you can use if you are interested in sponsoring one or more podcasts or advertising with us. And plenty of people are actually using that email address to send press releases, so thank you for that. Last week, for the 4th of July weekend, we had a loaded podcast for you with 3 guests: Sean MacDonald, CEO of Domain Therapeutics, Karina Kern, CEO and founder of Linkgevity, and Nadia Heron, General Manager of AI Simulation at Sandbox AQ. This week we're back down to 2, but no less quality, and our subjects this week are a silica nanoparticle gene delivery system and a point-of-care diagnostics system for urinary tract infections. Alright, first let's go over some of the news headlines of the biotech news over at deeptechdigest.com. I did miss a day this week because I was travelling back from a concert in Birmingham, and no, it wasn't Black Sabbath. Anyway, molecules fight HIV and other viral infections. There is a breakthrough in overcoming cancer drug resistance, and Synfini added $8.9 million in discovery funding to speed small molecule drug development. There were positive phase 3 results for Amgen's gastric cancer drug. Phase V debuted its new ClinOps AI platform, and InnoCare announced a solid tumour trial in China. Beargen Bio and OncoInvent announced a proposed merger. Hotspot Therapeutics presented preclinical small molecule data, and a new make-your-own weight loss drug uses an innovative genome editing approach. You can read all of these and more at deeptechdigest.com. Alright, it's time for the first of today's guests. A little later we'll be talking about diagnostics for urinary tract infections, but first, N4 Pharma is a UK biotech company developing a silica nanoparticle gene delivery system called Nuvec, which is being used to enable advanced therapies for cancer and other diseases. N4 Pharma has developed a preclinical RNA therapeutic, N4-101, which is a patient-friendly, orally delivered inflammation inhibitor for inflammatory bowel disease using Nuvec. We had a conversation with Nigel Theobald, CEO and founder of N4 Pharma, about the company and its work. First then, I wonder if you could tell me a bit about the history of N4 Pharma.
Okay, well, I set N4 Pharma back in 2014. I set it up. So I previously I was working with another business, sold out from there and took the funds from that because I wanted to actually set up a new company myself. So I funded the first sort of 2 to 3 years of the business. It was initially set up to find interesting technology that was coming out of academia. So looking to take it out of academia and see if we could bring it to market. And we had 2 or 3 different technologies that we were looking at. One was a way to make co-crystals. The other one was an improvement on working with a reformulation of sildenafil, which is the generic drug behind Viagra. And then the third one was a delivery system for nucleic acids out of University of Queensland, which is where we've ended up today. So the business was really looking at these exciting technologies, trying to understand if they had points of difference, could they really work, and then bring them to market. So we did a lot of work on the generic. We ended up doing some clinical trials. of this new improved version of Viagra, but unfortunately the clinical trial fails. It failed, and that's life when you're doing R&D. So we had to pivot and focus our efforts on the Nuvec delivery system, which is, where we are focused today.
Could you tell me a little bit about what Nuvec is?
It's a silica delivery system. What we didn't have as a sort of biotech, we're a very small biotech, so we realized we didn't have access to 30, 40, 50 million of funding to develop our own products. So we had to choose something that was something that we could spend the money on and develop ourselves. So we chose to look at a delivery system rather than an actual product itself. And we'll come on to, I'll explain a little bit more about how our strategy has changed as we've grown. So the Nuvec system itself is what they call a mesoporous silica nanoparticle. So if you imagine I don't know if you play golf, but if you've seen them play, you have these little practice golf balls, hollow with holes on the side. Imagine that's what a mesoporous silica particle looks like. So it has a hollow cavity and lots of tiny little pores. We were using that for developing vaccines for subunit, because what people do with that system is they put elements inside and then it slowly comes back out over time. You can't get nucleic acids inside a system like that because of the shape and the structure. DNA looks like a sort of curvy figure of 8, and it won't go in a small, tiny pore. So we developed this system where it was a mesoporous silica particle, but it had spikes on the edge of it. If you go walking in the country, trying to give a visualization for your listeners, and you get these little burrs stuck on your socks and clothing when you walk through grass, that's what the Nuvec system looks like. So it's this tiny little mesoporous core, and then it's got this spiky structure. And what that spiky structure does, the Nuvec allows you to attach the nucleic acid into and within that spiky structure. So what you can do with a normal mesoporous system is you can just do what they call charge reaction. You can take a silica particle, which is negatively charged. You can then convert it using a form of chemistry. We use polyethylene PEI, and that makes it positive, and then you can stick a negatively charged DNA to it. But the problem is it's just all on the surface of the particle. And as soon as you put it into the body, it just gets degraded. It comes off. It becomes useless. So you can't use standard mesoporous particles for nucleic acid delivery. But with our system, you entangle it within the spikes. And when it's in the body, it doesn't dissolve straight away. It protects it, and then it can release the payload over time, and once it's been injected or placed in the body in another manner. So it's quite an interesting technology, because it was developed specifically for nucleic acids rather than putting other things, just attaching them to the edge.
And you mentioned that the development of that led to other things. How did that happen?
Well, just step back a little bit, as I say, what we were looking to do, the business, we were looking to see how things worked and how things different. So we did a little bit of analysis to say, well, how does that system compare to the systems that are currently being used, which is mainly viral vectors and lipids? So we started to look at whether there were some key points of difference. And we found that our system is very good at protecting the payload, but it's also much easier to load. You can get a DNA or RNA or siRNA onto our particle just by mixing, whereas a lipid structure is a really complicated, expensive process, and it completely encapsulates the payload. And then you have to get it in the system, and then it's difficult to get out, et cetera, et cetera. But ours is very easy to get on, and it's very easy to get off at the right time. And the other thing about being a mixing process like that simple, we can get lots of different RNA on at the same time. So we found that we could get 2, 3, or 4 different RNA onto the same nanoparticle. So when it's protected there. And the other thing that we can do relatively easy, because silica's a nice, easy compound to work with, you can attach various targeting ligands or peptides or antibody to the silica itself. And then that will allow the delivery system to target specific cells or specific organs in the body. So we found out all these different things about our system. And then we also basically found out that it's very cheap and easy to make and very stable. So I don't know if you remember the vaccines that came out at COVID time. When they first came out, they had to be stored at minus 80 degrees, and because of the lipid structure, and it's ours can be stored at room temperature for 6 months once it's freeze dries, and then reconstituted without any drop in performance at all. So it's a very stable system as well. So we've got a lot of things going for it. So that's why we decided to focus on the Nuvec system as a business.
Is that proving to be something that other companies are interested in utilizing?
Well, they are, but we have some more work to do. Our business model is to license this to third parties who are developing their compounds. So, as I say, we don't have the funds. We don't own the compounds. So there are big companies out there that own a lot of RNA. They own a lot of the nucleic acid therapies, and they need delivery systems because you can't just put the RNA into the body. If you put it into the body, it just won't work. It gets degraded. It gets eaten by the nuclease, and it being negatively charged, it's very hard to get into a cell. So RNA needs a delivery system. A lot of the other delivery systems that are out there, like viral vectors and lipids, are very toxic. So viral vectors are incredibly toxic, very expensive to make, and therefore have a lot of side effects. Lipid nanoparticles, they're particularly good at focusing on the liver because that's where lipids go. Lipids go to the liver. So if you look at a lot of companies that have developed products using lipids, it's all for liver disease. If you want to do a liver disease, don't come and talk to us, right? Because you just use a lipid and away you go. But if you want to go somewhere else, or if you don't want to go to the lipid, then that's where you can come and talk to companies like us. As I say, because it also there's, we can get multiple payloads on, and one of the things we've found lately, last 18 months, is that because it's very good at protecting, we can also use it to deliver orally. So we can actually put the Nuvec system in a capsule, target it to a specific area in the colon where it's released, and it actually performs and delivers the payload to be effective in the colon or the upper colon, lower colon environment. So there's a number of different points of difference, and we do know that companies are interested, but we have more work to do, and we can explain a little bit more about that if you want. Later, before we actually will get a license from a pharma company, because there are so many things you have to do to actually get from preclinical work into clinical work, and that's what we're looking to do next.
What's the relevance of being able to administer orally?
So a couple of things, really. If you've got an autoimmune disease working in the gut, in gastric environment, then injecting something, there's an awful lot of material you have to inject in the body for it to get to that particular point for it to work. So you have, at the moment, for IBD, you have what people work on called TNF alpha inhibitors. IBD, which is irritable bowel disease, as opposed to IBS, which is just the standard irritable bowel syndrome. The disease is pretty much colitis and ulcerative colitis as like a classic IBD disease. These basically take off because the body stops working properly and it produces too much TNF alpha, and that TNF alpha starts attacking the body and actually causing inflammation. So you have this build-up of TNF alpha. So you want to knock down and stop the TNF alpha from working. So these TNF alpha inhibitors, these compounds that companies, there are many drugs around there, they inject them. So you've got a painful series of injections, and you have to put an awful lot in, and you do get associated side effects with that. So you very, very expensive drugs don't work particularly well with a patient because you do get compliance issues and get side effect issues, but they do knock down the TNF alpha. So what we've developed is by delivering orally, you're actually delivering the TNF alpha knockdown locally. So you're not putting it in the whole body, circulating around the whole body, causing all these other side effects. You're actually delivering it into the colon or into the upper colon where the actual irritation is taking place. So if you knock down the TNF alpha production there locally, then it's far better for the patient. So, that's why we're focusing on the oral delivery.
And so what's your N4 101 program?
So N4 101 as our lead program. So as I mentioned, we are showcasing our delivery system, and we're looking at showing all these benefits to different people. But one of the things we decided to do was to also look at developing our own product, and it's something that will take a lot longer from the delivery system. But in doing this, we're also showcasing the benefits of the Nuvec system itself. So as I mentioned, oral delivery is really important. So it's an oral delivery product. So it's an oral TNF alpha inhibitor or anti-inflammatory product. It does two other things as well. So I mentioned the fact that we can give multiple payloads onto the Nuvec particle. So what we have are two things. We have an siRNA, which is used to knock down and stop the production of TNF alpha. But we also put on a second RNA, and in our first studies, we've put on a messenger RNA for IL-10, which is to produce more IL-10. So what happens with IBD, I mentioned you get an excessive amount of TNF alpha produced, and that stops your body's natural anti-inflammatory mechanism from working. So if you can cut down the TNF alpha and boost the body's natural IL-10 production, you're doing two things. You're not only stopping the TNF alpha from being over-inflammatory, you're actually building up the body's natural defense system to try and stop the inflammatory agents that are already there. So you have this two-pronged approach, and that you can only do from the fact that we can combine it with the multiple loading. And then the other thing that you need to do is you need to target specific cells. And in this case, what we're doing is we're targeting macrophage cells, because it's the macrophage cells in the gut that are the cause of the irritable bowel disease. So we've got the elements of protection through oral, multiple loading, and targeting into the gut. So it showcases all the benefits of our system, but fundamentally it gives a really nice product that's designed to be safe and easy to take for the patient, delivered locally, and attacking the TNF alpha production actually in situ from the gut. So it's something that people are showing a little bit of interest in. And now, as we develop that, we will hope to license that to someone, but also we're using that to showcase the basics of our delivery system as well.
The fact that it's taken orally, is it something that would have to be taken continually?
Well, that's, yeah. So when you have IBD, you can't necessarily cure it. You're just treating the symptoms. So patients that suffer from ulcerative colitis and other irritable bowel symptoms, it's a chronic condition. It will carry on. So imagine if you have to keep going back to hospital every now and again and having horrible, nasty injections that cause side effects on your body, versus if you can take this tablet in the privacy of your own home. I know which one I would want to do. And that's the sort of compliance issue. So it takes it away from the clinician, so the clinician can prescribe a course of treatment which you can take at your convenience. And yes, you will have to take it continuously. And that's one of the benefits we've already seen in our early studies, that Nuvec works particularly well for that.
Excellent. And I know that you've recently come up with an in vivo study. I wonder if you could tell me a bit about the results from that.
Yeah, so with that study, what we were doing is we were put two siRNA onto our particle, loaded the Nuvec into an enterically coated capsule, and we did a study in an animal study in mice. So the mice had IBD, and in this particular example, we were looking to see whether or not we could reduce the inflammatory markers in the mice. And that was a very successful study. So we saw a good knockdown of all the TNF alpha. So the TNF alpha was completely suppressed. We saw a buildup of IL-10. That worked by suppressing the TNF alpha. It allows the body to come back and recharge itself and produce more IL-10. And importantly, we saw a sustained effect over a period of time. So we checked it at not just at the initial dose, we tested 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 11 days. And we saw that there was a sustained level of TNF alpha reduction. So that's really good. So that's sort of indicating and hinting that with a final product, with our N4 you're not going to be taking it daily, but you're not going to be, you might be taking it weekly, say, whatever, but there'll obviously be a dose and a time course that we need to investigate. But it's hinting that you'll have a good product that if you keep taking it, it will continuously top up and continuously suppress the TNF alpha. So we're really excited by the early work that we're doing on this, but it is still at a very early stage.
Where do you go with that trial from here with the N4 101?
So with 101, what we're doing, we're now looking at we're looking to repeat that study in a different environment with a much broader, wider study, looking at where the particle goes in the body. What we know is we can get it into the gut, it works, it delivers its payload, and it reduces the TNF alpha. But if you're then talking to Big Pharma, the second question comes, well, where does it go after that? Does it stay in the gut? Does it pass out? How long does it take to go away? Where does it go and how does it exit the body? Because you imagine if you are taking something, say once a week, whatever, and it doesn't go out of the body and you get a build-up of the system in your stomach. That wouldn't be very good. We need to understand the biodistribution of the system so that you can understand what is the timing of how you want to take a particular product. And the other thing we're also doing is we're just checking whether or not we put something else onto the particle rather than IL-10. What we've seen is that by reducing the TNF alpha and having the IL-10 on there, but by reducing the TNF alpha, it then allows the body to start producing the IL-10 again. So we might not need to put as much IL-10 on there to do that because the body naturally recovers. So what we're looking at is whether we use the multiple loading by putting maybe 2 or maybe even 3, but putting a separate knockdown so that we knock down another causation of the inflammatory problem in the body. Because TNF alpha is just one inflammatory agent that causes IBD. So we could knock down 2 different inflammatory agents and have the body reproduce its own IL-10 and start other anti-inflammatory markers. So we're looking to see whether or not we can actually improve the performance even further. And then we want to do a more aggressive challenge model. So we'd like to have quite severe IBD to see, can we actually get TNF alpha suppression in the severe case of IBD rather than just in the standard IBD model that we've initially investigated. So there's lots more sort of preclinical work that we need to do. And then alongside that, we're sorting our CMC manufacturing just so that we're getting ready to get into the clinic. We need to optimize it so that when we go into the clinic, we can make it at higher scale and at clinical grade. So there's lots to be done, which is why we've raised some money recently. So that's all work on the program that does 2 things. It progresses the N4 101 project, moves it forward, but also, as I say, showcases and highlights all the key benefits of our delivery system. So ideally, we can look to license our system to a third party to get the funds that we need for doing the next bit of work on the N4 101 program. The biotech, you can go from one milestone to the next. You have to hit a good milestone, then you can raise more funds to go to the next milestone. But when you finally get there, the rewards for both the patient and the company are astronomical. Companies like us that started out with delivery systems, early stage guys are in 300 million valuations, and successful companies that have developed 3 or 4 products are in valuations of billions. So there's a lot to go for with a delivery system like ours that solves a lot of issues. So ideally, we want to be building and growing our system and in the future converting ourselves into a reasonable sized biotech delivering our own products. So that, as I say, there's lots of exciting times ahead for us.
And what are the next steps with Nuvec?
Let's say the next steps will be to do that work on the actual CMC side and the extra study. And we'll look as well at, there are other things that we can do. So we're also going to look to see whether there's another quicker, easier program, maybe in the oncology space, where we can take the Nuvec system, combine it with something and target a specific cancer. So that, again, will be very exciting both for the business and potential licensing deals. So we can look at other things, but we have to be careful that we don't go too mad and trying to spend too much money looking at lots of different things. We need to focus on our actual platform itself and the IBD early stage work, and then look at the next product as okay, this is an exciting opportunity. Let's do some early work on that and start talking to people about who might take that forward. And that might be academic collaborations in the early stages, or it might be us doing some simple work ourselves and then talking to someone else about further funding of that.
How has the funding drive been going?
The market is in the worst state I've seen for a long, long time. The funding is really difficult in the US as well, and the funding is very difficult over here in the Europe and the UK. So you tend to get an approach in the UK which is more smaller. So you get stages of investment, whereas in America they tend to go all up front and give it to you all at once. What was really encouraging for us is that we raised 1.7 in probably the market that was probably one of the worst times I've seen at a very small discount. So it was a very good raise, which is showing that people are interested in what we're doing. They're prepared to back it. They see that we've got the potential. And if we get it right and we can convert ourselves into a product-led company that then licenses those products to major pharma, there's a huge opportunity for investors to make money in this as well. So it's good that people can see that story and are prepared to back us at the early stage.
A company able to pivot and capitalize on its gene delivery system, both internally and externally. Clearly a company doing well. Now we go to Wales to learn about antimicrobial resistance and a new diagnostic tool that should make it much easier to diagnose urinary tract infections accurately and very quickly. It's been developed by Llusern Scientific, and to tell us more about the company, urinary tract infections and more, is co-founder and CEO of the company, Dr. Emma Hayhurst. So first I should set the scene, and if you could give me a bit of background on the company.
Yeah, sure. So the company was formed back in 2020. It's a spin-out from the University of South Wales, and it was founded by myself and my colleague and CSO, Llusern Scientific. And it was actually following on from a project that we started back in 2016, where we were developing a diagnostic that was supposed to be tackling antimicrobial resistance and that had global applicability, so it could be used in any setting, in any country all around the world. That was the initial spark of the idea for us. And we entered as an academic team. It was a challenge prize fund to give £8 million to the winner who could develop this technology. And that's where it all started. And we trundled along in academia for 4 years, getting all of our proof of concept data and doing all the research and development. And then everything accelerated for us during COVID. And what we had before COVID was a very ugly prototype that had wires all over it. And it functioned, but it didn't look nice. And we got the funding during COVID to develop that into what we now have, which is a very beautiful looking analyzer, point of care analyzer. And that was because we knew that we could pivot and we could develop a COVID test. So we kind of went down that route for a couple of years and then went back to urinary tract infections at the end of the pandemic. And we've been working on them ever since. And we've gone from a team of 2 part-time academics to a full-time team of 7 people now, with a board of directors and a production facility and a research facility and our own premises just north of Cardiff.
I'm going to add that to my CV, or from what you just said, functions but doesn't look nice.
Yeah. Well, the functioning bit is the important bit, right? So
you mentioned the fact that it's a spin out. That explains the location a little bit, but is there much of a life sciences community there?
Yeah, there really is, actually. It's a real focus for the Welsh Government. I think they see life sciences as a real strategic direction for them to go in. And so we get an awful lot of support. And I think what's nice about Wales is that we are quite a small ecosystem as well. So you have this community of life science companies, and they don't tend to be the big pharma. They tend to be kind of small to medium companies and micro companies like ourselves. But there's a growing number of us, and we have a really good network through MediWales mostly. So they run a whole load of events that are attended by the companies, by government, by NHS, and also by academia. So I think we have this unique world where we've got quite a short chain to government, which is nice. And then everyone begins to get to know each other. And I think that really helps because it means you get some real strong collaborations. I think what we're missing now is I really would love a big building that's full of lab space that startups could kind of rent out when needed, because we had to build our own, which was obviously a bit more challenging. But I think that will come. And I think it's a good time to be in life sciences in Wales, definitely.
We're talking about urinary tract infections. I wonder if you could give me a bit of background on that, the numbers and what they are.
Yeah, sure. So urinary tract infections are any infection that obviously affects the urogenital tract. They are incredibly common. They're the second most common bacterial infection behind respiratory. Nearly 50% of women will suffer from at least one UTI during their lives, and the risk of suffering from UTI increases with age. So many older adults come down with UTIs, both male and female, and that obviously increases as they go into residential care. It's about 1/4. The estimate is about 1/4 of adults at any one time in a care home will have a UTI. And they can be really difficult to diagnose in that population. And obviously the risks of complications are much more severe as you get older. You maybe have comorbidities. But yeah, they're basically when bacteria or a virus, but mostly bacteria, has got into your bladder or your urinary tract and has established itself there and is therefore causing an infection. You can get lower urinary tract infections and you can get upper urinary tract infections, but the one that we're focusing on are the lower UTIs. So that is your typical, it hurts when you go to the toilet, you need to go more often, you often need to go at night. And although they start in the urinary tract, they can often go on to become more systemic than that. And they're the second leading cause of sepsis as well.
I was going to ask about that because it's something that I think many people think of as just something that you get and get rid of, but it can be more serious than that.
Absolutely. As I say, especially with older adults, where it can often end in, you get these kind of non-specific signs of deterioration. People might seem confused and you're not sure why, and it can often be caused by an underlying UTI. So if you can diagnose and treat the UTI earlier, you've got more chance of people maintaining their independence and their health for longer as they age. But it's not just older adults that can suffer. There's a whole load of women. Estimates are about 1.7 million women in the UK living with chronic or recurrent UTI. And that's where they have an initial infection and it was dismissed as just a UTI. That was a lot of women's lived experience. They go to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, well, just clean your bits more. And there's this kind of dismissal of women with this problem. But, you know, even an acute uncomplicated UTI is several days of really debilitating pain, I promise. And for a subset of women, they go on to have embedded infections. So that's where it's not treated properly and often the bacteria can get into the lining of the bladder and then kind of acts as a reservoir for reinfection. And some women go on to have decades of really debilitating infections very regularly, and this can have a real negative impact on their whole quality of life. I think this is being recognized more and more as there's a focus on women's health, and there's now an understanding that perhaps our health system does not serve all its patients equally. So I think this is a good time to be working on this problem, because I think there's a lot of patients beginning to have their voice heard. So I hope that we're part of the solution for that.
And what are the current diagnoses and treatments?
Current diagnosis depends on the patient group, and it's different if you're a child, it's different if you are over 65 or under 65, it's different if you're a catheterized individual. But generally speaking, a doctor will diagnose on the basis of symptoms, and the problem with those is, especially in older adults, they can be really vague, but they can also be incredibly varied. So it's not like there's one definite clinical symptom that will mean that this person has a UTI. It's often quite a lot of guesswork. And in fact, there was a study that came out a few years ago that looked at how accurate symptom-based diagnosis was. And they found that 40% of the people who classified as these guys probably should have a UTI actually didn't. And on the other side, 40% of the people that were classified based on symptoms into probably not having a UTI actually did have a UTI. So that shows how inaccurate it can be. So that's one option. And then they can also use a dipstick. So these are the little color pH-based strips go into the urine, very cheap, very quick, very inaccurate. So much so that in older adults in particular, it actually states that you really shouldn't use them. They're not recommended. And at best, they're kind of 60 to 70% sensitive, which means you're missing 30 to 40% of infections. And then the only other option is for the clinician to send off for a microbiology culture, which is where you wee in a pot and that goes off to a laboratory. And then if you're lucky, 2 days later, you'll get a result back, by which time the clinician has already made their treatment decisions. So you get a little bit more information from bacterial culture, but it comes way too late because it's coming 2 days after you've seen the patient. In terms of treatment, our first-line antibiotics for lower UTI is nitrofurantoin and trimethoprim. So 2 types of antibiotic that's generally given. And these are often, probably about 90% of patients will get given an antibiotic, even though about 50% of them may not have an underlying UTI. And there may be some other reason that they've got these symptoms that's then not being investigated. So currently a little bit of a guesswork, and that's what we're trying to help with, trying to provide a little bit of evidence on which to base the treatment decision.
Right. Is antimicrobial resistance an issue in this as well?
Yeah, definitely. The problem with not having good diagnostic tools is you get underdiagnosis and missed infections, but obviously you also get overdiagnosis. And this is another reason that I think there's more of a focus on UTI at the moment, because it's about 20% of all our community prescriptions are for UTI. There was 6 million prescriptions in primary care given out for UTI last year. And those are based on, as I say, at best, a little bit of guesswork. And that means that a whole load of patients are getting antibiotics that they don't need, or they're getting the wrong antibiotic because the drug-bug combination is not going to be right. So that is going to drive the spread of antimicrobial resistance. Basically, what you're doing there is creating a really nice environment for resistant bacteria to evolve and to grow and to be selected for. So yeah, that's a really important part of what we're trying to prevent as well.
Could you take me through a bit of the process of from the initial motivation to start working in this area through to the steps that you took to develop the Lodestar DX system?
So I'm a microbiologist by background, and I've always had an interest in antimicrobial resistance and also in global health and the inequalities in global health. I worked in a rural clinic in West Africa for many months before my PhD, and I kind of saw firsthand how it's not always the cleverest thing that's needed. It's just a thing that works, and that works in kind of low resource settings where perhaps you have generators coming on or electricity power cuts all the time, and you have some really challenging kind of environmental conditions, extreme heat, extreme dust, etc., etc. So I've always had this idea of wanting to work on something that could make a difference in those types of environments. And so I was actually not research active for many years. I was a lecturer up at the University of South Wales. I had 2 children. I worked part-time for a while, and my research went very much on the back foot. And then I got a fellowship, and it was aimed at women who'd had a career break. And this fellowship was all around tackling antimicrobial resistance. So that prompted me to try to think about how we could do it. And I got talking to my colleague Llusern, and he was a molecular wizard who came from one of the biggest labs that worked on molecular technology in the UK. And he said, well, I'm using this technology called LAMP, and why don't we apply that? We kind of discussed it and said, well, why don't we apply that for diagnosis? So we looked at the literature, and there really wasn't much out there. So we thought, okay, well, we could do this. And that's how it all started. And we got a little bit of seed funding. And so the first step we took was to employ a research assistant to develop the actual molecular test itself, because our test system consists of single-use test kits and then an analyzer that will read the results of the reaction and convert that into a positive or negative result. So we started with the test reaction itself. We said, okay, let's try and detect E. coli is the most common cause of UTI. Let's show proof of concept that we can detect E. coli directly from urine, and then we can work from there. And so that's what we did. We had a really good collaboration with Public Health Wales. We wanted to remove the barriers that people have for using molecular technology. So we wanted to get it out of a lab setting. We wanted to make it simple, easy to use, affordable, quick, etc. So we showed we could do that with E. coli. And then we worked with our engineering colleagues to develop an analyzer that will basically hold that reaction at the right temperature, and that will it's detecting the fluorescence. So it's taking readings every 10 seconds, and it's looking for that reaction curve. From there, we developed the algorithm that would then convert that into a positive or negative result. So that's the point we were at when COVID hit. And then, as I say, we went from that to using a design company that helped us make the analyzer look much nicer and was much more user-friendly. And then we developed the whole of the rest of the test panel. So we said, okay, if it works for E. coli, we can do it for the other bacteria that cause UTI as well. Once we've got a working prototype and a working test kit, then we set out to start getting regulatory approval, because obviously you can't just sell a diagnostic, you have to have MHRA approval for being able to sell it. And so we started working on building out the documents that we required to gain regulatory approval. What we also then realized is that we were trying to produce the test kits and the analyzer, and we were using partners to do that. And with the test kits, we thought, no one can do this as well as we can. So we decided to build our own production facilities rather than relying on an external partner. And that's what we've been doing as well, because obviously there's a whole load of documents you need to do for that. You need to show that your quality management system is working, that you have got everything in place. And that's been a huge amount of work. And I'm really proud of the fact that the team have done that, really gone from nothing all the way through to having what we currently have, which is ISO 13485 accredited certified production facilities.
I suppose a lot of those things are things that when you first set out, you don't even think that you're going to need, but you just told me that ISO number, and you know it off by heart.
Yeah, definitely. It's been such a journey, and I honestly believe that if I'd known what I was letting myself in for, I'd never have done it. But I think we were so naive that we just kept saying, yeah, sure, let's do it. And I think that's really been in our favor, because otherwise, I think if we'd thought too much about it or got too bogged down with everything that needed to be done, I don't know that we'd still be here. So I think we probably probably did us a favor that we didn't really know what we were doing. We've learned so much, and we couldn't have done it alone, of course not. We've had so much support from, well, not just from Welsh Government, but from Innovate UK, from other grants, from, some of the team that joined later on after the founders, and we wouldn't be here without them. But, I've become an expert from being a microbiologist. I'm now an expert in bringing a product to market and in design thinking and in raising money and setting out business strategy. And Llusern, my co-founder, is now an expert in quality and regs, having been a plant geneticist originally. And we've also both learned so much about the clinical space as well. I think that's really important. I don't think that you can develop a test without understanding the clinical pathway and the patients that you're ultimately trying to benefit. I don't think that you'd get it right if you weren't engaging with them as well. So yeah, I'm an entirely different professional individual, but probably also an entirely different personal individual than I was when I started the journey. No regrets, but yeah, not sure I'd do it again.
Some respects, it's one of those things where you say to yourself, well, we've come this far, because it's always one at a time and it's a pathway. So you get to a certain stage and you can't turn back at that point. So you just have to, do we go over this one? Do we go around it, through it?
That's exactly it. And I think you build resilience as well, because I think the first few knockbacks, you get so deflated, and the positive bits you think, oh my gosh, well, this is going to be it, and I've kind of flattened out a lot. I'm not as high from them, but I'm also not as low from the lows. I think you need an awful lot of resilience and ultimately a belief in what you're doing. I think if you didn't have that, then you wouldn't be able to keep going, because yeah, it's exactly that. It's like, okay, next challenge, next disaster, let's pick ourselves up, let's work out what to do, and let's keep going. And I think we've just lucked upon a team of people that are all able to do that. I think that's an essential skill if you want to try and build a startup, is extreme resilience and dogged determination.
What are the advantages that your system has over existing methods?
The big thing is that we are providing an immediate result. NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, has recognized that point of care testing for UTI is an unmet health need. And the reason that they say that is because they know that current test results are not getting there in time to impact treatment decisions. So if we truly want to prevent over and under diagnosis, we need a decision that is coming in a time frame that works for the clinical pathway. So ours returns a result in 35 minutes, as opposed to the current method of culture, which takes, as I say, 2 to 3 days. And that's massive, because it means it can actually be very difficult for a clinician to decide what the best course of action is for a patient. And I've heard many of them say, often they will prescribe antibiotics just in case, and they know that that's not the right thing, and they know that that's not what's needed for antimicrobial resistance, but they really have nothing on which to base it, and they don't want to leave a vulnerable individual without treatment in case that's the individual who really does need the treatment. So I think it's incredibly difficult for them, and I think that immediate result is really, really important. I think that allows clinicians to confidently rule out infection. But I also think the other thing that our test does is it gives information about the bacteria that's causing the infection. So you'll know whether you've got an E. coli or a Klebsiella or a Proteus. And I think that can tailor treatment decisions, but it also empowers patients. And I think that's the thing that people are beginning to think about more and more, is that patients want to know. They want to understand the infection that they've got. And I think there is a real demand from women to know what bacteria is causing the infection, not just to be kind of given an answer from the GP based on no evidence whatsoever. And I'm hoping that our test is part of the move to more patient-centric care anyway, because no diagnostic test is perfect. But what happens at the moment is the diagnostic decision is made in a laboratory completely removed from the patient. And I think bringing those two together through any kind of point of care system is a really massive benefit, because it means that the clinician can make the decision on the basis of some evidence, but also with the patient in front of them, so that they can consider that as well. I think that's really powerful.
The process itself, is that just done by the GP themselves, or do they need somebody else to run those tests for them?
It depends on the setting. So we are only just kind of launching commercially in the UK, and we've been taking part in an evaluation in collaboration with Oxford University, and that has meant that our test has been in 20 GP sites across the country. And there it was generally research nurses or healthcare assistants that ran the test. It wasn't the GP themselves. we're working with a couple of care homes now, and in those cases, again, it's the care home staff rather than the GP, but the GP will then act on the result. So it can be used by any healthcare professional. That's what we've kind of aimed it for, whether it's the GP themselves or whether it's someone else who works in the practice. It depends on the way that they run things in their practice, really.
And I guess your most recent news was the ISO. What does that mean for the company?
So ISO 13485 certification basically shows that we are meeting international standards for our quality management system, for the design and development of our tests, and also for the manufacture of our test kits. So I hope that it gives people confidence that we are managing the risks and that we're complying with international regulations and that our test is as safe and as effective as it can be. And I think, as I said earlier, to build that from scratch means that we were able to do it properly. So it gives that kind of badge of confidence, I think, in the technology. And it also is part of our regulatory requirements. So we currently have regulatory approval in the UK, and that's great. And we got that before we got 13485 because it wasn't a requirement for UK CA marking. But for international regulatory approval, CE marking, and for sale in many international countries, we do need ISO 13485. So it's a medical device specific certification of the quality of production of our analyzer and our test kits. It will open up other markets for us internationally as well. And I think that's really key for us as a business to be able to hopefully get this test to other countries where it's needed as well.
Right. Speaking of which, another thing that I noticed in the press release was the order in which you're doing things. Quite often, the US is the most important market for everybody, and then it spreads out to other Western countries and maybe trickles down from there, and you're taking a different path?
Yeah, I don't think that you can say that you're trying to solve the problem of antimicrobial resistance and then ignore the global hotspots, and India is a global hotspot. And as I say, going back to the original purpose of this whole endeavor was about tackling antimicrobial resistance on a global level. And so for me, that means being in India. And it's a little bit Marmite. Some people think that's great and other people kind of warn us off. But we went out there in December last year and learned an awful lot about the settings out there and the clinical situation. And it made us confident that we do have a technology that will work in many settings in India. And it also made us kind of even more determined that this is the right path for us. So yes, I agree that it's slightly unusual, but we're putting our flag in the ground there and saying, no, I think this is the way to go. And the Middle East and North Africa it's a little bit more pragmatic. They also have high and rising antimicrobial resistance rates. It's a fairly well-financed market, which balances out some of the settings in India where maybe it's a little bit trickier to get margins on our test. And it's also down to regulatory requirements. Both India and the Middle East will accept UKCA with ISO 13485. So it means that we can immediately start working on registering our product in those countries. We do have the US in our plans, but the US is a big beast and it's quite uncertain at the moment. And it also obviously has its own regulatory requirements, which makes it more challenging for companies like ours potentially to break into that market. So we have taken on a US advisor and we're building our roadmap for US market entry. But we felt that there was other opportunities. And again, perhaps in some of the countries that are sometimes overlooked, but that also do need good diagnostic tests.
Do you think that your earlier work in Africa maybe influenced that in some ways because it gives you that kind of sense of urgency and the sense of need?
Yeah, I definitely think that. And I think when I was out in Ghana, I saw firsthand some of the inappropriateness of the technology that got donated to the clinic that I worked in. Very kind of expensive, very fancy stuff that just was never, ever going to be appropriate in the setting that we were working in. So I think it's shaped everything really, just wanting to avoid that, not wanting to compete with the big expensive analyzers, but actually to get something that needs to be in these settings. And yeah, it's meant that I have seen, again, firsthand some of the impacts that a lack of good tests and treatment can have on patients. And it just makes me quite cross that people die of completely treatable diseases. That shouldn't happen in this day and age. So it was always part of our plans to reach out into settings that maybe are otherwise forgotten. We've got some really good conversations going on in Africa as well, with the hope that we can maybe launch the product in some of the countries in Africa too. That's why we went to India as well. And we were in quite a really nice hospital in India. So, and phenomenal staff. But you could see it really was the front line of antimicrobial resistance. I have never met doctors who understood more about antimicrobial resistance than the doctors that were working in that hospital in India. And that's because they had to, because they were living it every day, because every patient, we have the occasional one in the UK and Europe where you'll get someone with a very drug resistant infection, but there it's a daily occurrence, and it's incredibly eye-opening. It shows what's needed, but it also is scary because it's what's coming here eventually if we don't start doing something about it.
Are there other things that you're working on, or what's next for the company?
Yeah, I think a big thing for us is we know that what we've got will have huge clinical impact, but it's not the whole solution. But what I think stands us apart a bit is that we have the potential to build the whole solution for UTI. And by that, what I mean is we're working on Lodestar version 2. It'll have our existing test panel, but we're working on developing other test panels, one for a host biomarker of infection. So that will be like a CRP type test where it's a sign that there's some kind of inflammation going on in the person. We're also going to have rare pathogens, so that long tail of other bacteria that can potentially cause UTI. And we've got proof of concept for resistance gene detection. So that means we can do the whole lot. We can do all the way from host through to bacterial ID to resistance gene in one test system. And then what we want to do is incorporate those test results with some knowledge of the patient and the geographic location to give out a treatment recommendation. So at the moment, our test just says, right, they've got a UTI and this bacteria causes it. But I would love to help clinicians understand what that means by saying, okay, because it's Proteus and because this gene is present, then really you should be giving this antibiotic. And I think that's a massive unmet need. And I'm really excited about hopefully building that out and getting to the point where no matter what type of patient is being seen and no matter what setting we're in, we've got a technology that can influence treatment decisions and hopefully bring about patient benefit. So I'm very excited by that.
And hopefully there are newer treatments for bacterial infections on the horizon as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think one's just been approved, hasn't it? And I think we'll have a flexible system there where we can change it so that we're reflecting the current guidelines. So whatever is being recommended as a first choice antibiotic by the country, then we can have that in our software so that we can guide clinicians within the guidelines that they have to work in.
Are you looking for partnerships at this point as well?
We're always really keen to work with anyone who cares about this space. We have some really good partnerships with the NHS already, but we're always looking for anyone who wants to run evaluations of our technology. Please do get in touch. If anyone is struggling with what to do with UTI patients and looking for a better diagnostic tool, we've got great partnerships with academics as well, including several people at Oxford University and Cardiff University as well. But again, if anyone's got any cool grant applications or projects that they're interested in working with a commercial partner on, then we're always happy to talk to people. And finally, as always, as all startups I'm sure are, we're always looking to fundraise and to raise investment. So we are also raising a current investment round, and if anyone believes in what we're doing and wants to talk to me about that, I'd also love to talk to anyone about that too.
Well, I definitely wish them well. It's a great development and they're clearly doing things in the right order, going to places where the problem is greatest. And certainly some words of wisdom there on the dangers of antimicrobial resistance. So great news all round. Anyway, that's it for another podcast. A warm weekend forecast here, although I guess it's all relative. But I hope wherever you are that the weather isn't too extreme. If you have questions or comments, suggestions for guests, or want to sponsor one or more podcasts, please do get in touch. And you can do so via jim@deeptechdigest.com. So until next week, wherever in the world you are, I hope you have a great week. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Base to Base Biotech podcast. The Base to Base Biotech podcast is an Air Coastal Media Limited production.